My mother has spent a significant amount of my hard-earned money on my sister's wedding, which has left me feeling incredibly frustrated and betrayed. In a moment of anger and defiance, I decided to freeze my bank account, effectively spoiling their plans. This situation has forced me to confront a difficult dilemma in my life. For years, I have felt that my mother and sister have been taking advantage of me, and now it seems they have crossed a line that I can no longer accept. I want to cut ties with them, but the thought of pushing them into financial hardship feels cruel. I am a 38-year-old woman, married with 2 children, and I have been living in Ohio for the past 6 years. Originally, I hail from Houston. My childhood was far from perfect, largely due to my parents' divorce when I was 10 years old. My father left us, accusing my mother of being unfaithful, an allegation that still remains a point of contention. The truth of those accusations is unclear, especially since my mother never remarried. At the time of the divorce, my sister was only 5, and there were whispers that my father suspected my sister might not be his biological child. Despite this, my father allowed my mother to keep the house we lived in and took responsibility for my education. However, he did not provide any financial support for my sister, which has always puzzled me. My mother never seemed to contest this lack of support, perhaps contributing to the belief that my sister was not truly his daughter. During my childhood, my father was largely absent, though he would occasionally appear to pay for my school fees or bring gifts for me. When I reached high school, I took the initiative to reconnect with him, which led to a stronger relationship. He attended my wedding, even though my mother was not supportive of this decision. As time went on, I found that I formed a closer bond with my father than with my mother. He even traveled to visit me in Ohio twice after I settled here. Unfortunately, this relationship was cut short when he was diagnosed with a terminal illness, and we lost him last year. My mother's feelings about my relationship with my father were complicated. After he passed away, she seemed to withdraw from me, perhaps out of resentment that I had this connection with him. My father had named me as his heir, and although he married again many years after his divorce, he had no other children. He often expressed to me that I was his only daughter. It is no surprise that my mother and sister harbored feelings of jealousy towards me, especially after I inherited his substantial trust fund of $400,000. The dynamics of my family during my upbringing greatly favored my relationship with my father. He funded my education, allowing me to attend better schools and colleges compared to my sister. This financial support began shortly after my parents divorced, with the child support payments directly covering my schooling. My mother did use a portion of the funds for our household expenses and even on my sister, but she made sure I was content to avoid any complaints from me. While I wouldn't label my mother and sister as outright cruel, it was clear they didn't have much warmth towards me. I often felt like an outsider in my own home. It was evident that I was clever not only in my studies but also in navigating family relationships. This intelligence may have been why my mother never treated me poorly. Now, the source of my current frustration stems from the $400,000 that my father left for me. Since my family became aware of this inheritance, my mother and sister have been constantly asking me for money for various reasons. This is not the first time they have approached me for financial assistance. Over the years, as I progressed in my career, I have helped them whenever they needed it because I feel a sense of obligation. My mother works as a cashier at a supermarket, and my sister is employed in sales at a boutique. Their combined earnings are significantly less than what I make, which adds to my sense of duty to assist them. However, this obligation feels increasingly one-sided. While I understand they are family and they have not been outright malicious towards me, the extent of their financial requests has become overwhelming. I am caught in a complicated situation where I want to support them but am also deeply aware of my own needs and boundaries. A few months ago, my mom called me with a serious concern about our house. She explained that she wanted to renovate it because the walls, ceilings, and floors had all been damaged over time. This damage had only worsened since my dad moved out. The house had not been painted in years and the electrical wiring was in desperate need of repairs. The ceilings and walls were crumbling, particularly at the corners, creating an unsafe living environment. We had never had enough money to maintain the house properly. My mom mentioned that during thunderstorms or heavy rains, it felt as if the house might fall apart, making it increasingly difficult for them to live there. During our conversation, she hinted that it would be a good idea to get a loan from the bank to fund the renovations. However, she expressed her concern about the high interest rates that made borrowing money a heavy financial burden. I understood her underlying message. She was suggesting that I provide the financial support needed for the renovations. The conversation felt awkward because while we both knew what she was talking about, we didn't discuss it directly. After that call, I started avoiding her calls. Although she usually only called me once a month, this time she called 3 or 4 times within a month, which was unusual. Finally, I answered one of her calls. She spoke more straightforwardly this time and emphasized that living in the house was unsafe, especially during bad weather. This time, she directly asked me for money, promising to pay me back in installments. When I asked her how much money she needed, she responded with a staggering figure, $100,000. I was taken aback and lost my temper, telling her that I simply didn't have that kind of money to lend. She hinted at the inheritance money I was supposed to receive, which only infuriated me further. I refused to discuss the trust fund any longer. Instead, I told her that I could lend her a maximum of $50,000, and to my surprise, she agreed. Looking back, I realized I was too quick to offer that amount. I could have chosen to ignore her request entirely, but once I mentioned the $50,000, I felt a sense of obligation to follow through. I wasn't comfortable lending such a large sum of money without a clear plan, so my husband suggested I lend it to her in smaller amounts and monitor her progress with the renovation before giving her the next installment. I informed my mom that I would be sending her the $50,000 but in installments. I activated an old account I had in Houston and transferred $10,000 into that account, giving her access to it. When she asked why I didn't transfer the money directly into her account, I gave her a vague excuse, which was actually my husband's idea. I hoped this approach would help ensure that the money was used for its intended purpose, but I wasn't feeling very optimistic about getting it back. As time passed, I began to see signs that my mom and sister might be trying to take advantage of me for easy money. It had been 2 months since I initially started sending money for the renovation, and I had already handed over $20,000. At that point, I decided I wouldn't give them another cent. I quickly realized their kindness toward me was more about my money than genuine care. If they had been upfront about their needs, it would have hurt less. Then, I learned through a friend, not my family, that my sister was getting married. This news was shocking because it came from someone outside our family circle. My friend's husband worked as a wedding planner, and it turned out my sister had been in contact with him to plan her wedding. This extravagant event was set to be quite lavish, costing around $50,000, which was shocking to me. The fact that my sister was too busy to inform me herself was painful. She failed to invite me, and I heard that the guest list was around 100 people, which broke my heart. What bothered me the most was not just the emotional pain of being excluded, but also the financial aspect. I couldn't understand how my sister managed to pay for such a grand wedding. It was at one of the best venues in town, featuring endless food and drinks, along with stunning decorations and flowers. My concerns heightened when I checked the bank account where I was sending money to my mom for the renovations. To my dismay, the account was empty. I decided to call my mom to find out if the renovation work on her house had finally started. She answered promptly and confirmed that yes, she had hired a renovation company, but for some reason, the actual work had not commenced yet. As she spoke, I felt a deep frustration because it was hard to believe her. I had this nagging feeling that she was not being truthful, and it left me feeling uneasy. I wasn't sure if the money I had given her was genuinely being used for the renovations or if it was going toward my sister's wedding. The thought of them spending large amounts on a lavish wedding while simultaneously asking me for money was infuriating. I considered flying down to Houston just to see for myself what was truly happening, but eventually, I recognized that it would not be worth the effort. Instead, I decided to reach out to my aunt, who happens to be my father's sister and lives just a few blocks away from my mom's place. I asked her if she had any information about my sister's wedding plans. She confirmed that she did know about it, but mentioned that she wasn't invited, which made sense given that my mom has never been particularly fond of our father's side of the family. My aunt went on to share that my sister's wedding was quickly becoming the talk of the neighborhood. It struck me as odd, considering that just a few years prior, their house seemed to be falling apart from lack of maintenance. My parents had worked incredibly hard to make ends meet, and now it felt like everything had changed overnight. They had somehow managed to acquire a brand new house and were now planning an extravagant wedding. Listening to my aunt, I felt dizzy and disoriented. My mom had insisted that the house had yet to be repaired, yet my aunt was saying it gleamed with new paint. This contradiction made me think back to around 6 months ago when my mom had asked me for $20,000 for a knee transplant. I called her up, pretending that I needed details for a friend's father who was looking for an orthopedic surgeon for knee surgery. However, my mother stumbled over her words and claimed she couldn't recall the name of the doctor. When I pressed her for details about the hospital or clinic, she struggled even more to provide any specifics. It was evident that I had caught her off guard, and she quickly claimed that she had a bad connection and hung up on me. When I tried to call her again, her phone was switched off and my messages went unread for days. It became clear to me that she was lying. The money I had given her for the transplant was likely spent on the house renovation, and the funds she was now requesting were probably being funneled into my sister's extravagant wedding. To make matters worse, I learned that my sister's engagement party had even taken place on the front lawn of what used to be my home, decorated with lilies and overflowing with wine. I felt trapped in a cave, unaware that they had been living such a lavish lifestyle while pretending to be struggling in front of me to extract money from me. In response, I decided to cut ties with them. I stopped sending money to that account. When my mom called, I ignored her. I didn't reply to her texts, and even when my sister, who had not contacted me in years, reached out, I chose not to respond. I felt strong and determined not to entertain any more of their lies and manipulation. It didn't matter that I earned more than them or that I had received an inheritance from my father while they had received nothing. I refused to be taken advantage of any longer. I even made a vow to spoil my mother's plans for my sister's grand wedding. I had a strong feeling that I was right about my mom, especially when I didn't reply to any of their outreach attempts. However, things took an unexpected turn when my mom reached out to my husband. I had warned him not to engage with her calls or texts, but when she called, he answered. She began crying, claiming that I had ghosted them and that they needed money for the renovation work, which she insisted was already underway. In a moment of weakness, my husband revealed the truth. He told her I was aware of everything, that she had been using me for money all along, and that the funds were actually going toward the wedding. At that point, I was furious. I wanted them to experience the consequences of their deceit, but my husband had unwittingly ruined my plans. He also mentioned that we knew about the lie regarding the knee transplant and that she had spent that money on the house repairs instead. It felt like everything was unraveling in ways I had not anticipated. After that call, my mom flooded my phone with messages and apologies. She insisted that there had been a misunderstanding. She explained that she had borrowed money from someone to fix the house, and now she was using my money to pay him back. I was not convinced and felt it was just another excuse. After numerous calls and texts from her, I finally told her I would only talk if she promised to be honest with me. She agreed, so I called her. It was during this conversation that she revealed the whole truth. She admitted that my sister wanted a big, extravagant wedding, but they didn't have enough money to make it happen. They decided to ask me for the money, and it was actually my sister's idea to say they needed it for house repairs. They knew I hadn't visited Houston in years and hadn't been in touch with anyone there, which meant I wouldn't know that the house had already been renovated. I questioned her about why they didn't just come to me directly and ask for the money for the wedding instead of lying. My mom replied that my sister didn't want to ask me for a favor outright. This response left me stunned. I confronted her, telling her that I was aware she had used the funds I provided for her knee transplant to pay for the house repairs. When I mentioned this, she fell silent, and I reiterated that I knew the truth and there was no point in hiding it any longer. She explained that the house was falling apart, and since my sister's in-laws were planning to visit, they needed to get it fixed quickly. In that moment of urgency, they couldn't think of a better reason to ask me for money, so my mom panicked and called me, claiming that she urgently needed funds for a knee transplant. I was shocked at how quickly I transferred the money, doing so within hours of her call. While I stood strong during the conversation, inside, I was heartbroken. The realization that my own mother was deceiving me for her convenience was painful. I understood that financial challenges can be hard, but that did not justify manipulating and extorting money from me by playing on my emotions. After hearing all of this, I hung up and cried for hours, feeling a deep sense of betrayal. I couldn't remember the last time I cried that hard, perhaps it was during my father's passing. On that particular day, I missed him terribly and longed for his genuine love and care. 2 days later, I received a voicemail from my mom. She asked if I could please send the remaining amount now that I knew the truth, so they could continue with the wedding preparations. I was so disgusted that I wanted to lash out at her. How could she be so selfish? There was no remorse in her voice, just an underlying urgency for more money. They didn't even bother to invite me to the wedding, not even for formality. After all that had transpired, I felt an overwhelming frustration and decided to block both my mom and sister's numbers. I made it clear to my husband that he was not to engage with them either, warning him that if he did, he would find himself sleeping outside on the porch on a cold night. I was serious about this stance. I stayed in touch with my aunt, who informed me that the wedding was set for next month. While I didn't share the specifics about the money issue with her, I was aware that my mom and sister were struggling to piece together the wedding they had envisioned. I felt a sense of satisfaction knowing that they were facing obstacles in their plans. As the wedding day drew closer, I continued to receive calls and voicemails from my mom and sister, pleading for money. Yet, I remained steadfast in my refusal to help. On the day of the wedding, I received one last voicemail from my mom. She expressed her shame in me and declared that she was disowning me. She said I should never call her mom again or visit her. Hearing those words broke my heart. I cried inconsolably in front of my husband, feeling a mix of sadness and betrayal. People might label me as harsh and unyielding for the way I reacted, and my mom accused me of being arrogant and selfish for ruining my sister's wedding. But she never thought about the lies she had told. I had helped them in the past out of obligation, believing they were my family, yet to them, I seemed to be nothing more than a source of money. On the wedding day, I got a call from a friend whose husband was the wedding planner. She revealed that the wedding was likely going to be cancelled because my mom and sister had not paid the remaining installment of the wedding costs. I asked her about the amount they had spent on the wedding, and she replied that it was $20,000. I remarked that this sum was sufficient to host a decent wedding celebration. She agreed but added that her sister had chosen to go all out with top-quality decorations and catering. The venue itself had already consumed a considerable portion of that budget, approximately $20,000. She inquired if I would be attending the wedding, to which I explained that I had other commitments and would be unable to make it. My friend was aware that I didn't share a close relationship with my mother and sister. Still, deep down, I felt a heavy weight of guilt because I believed I had contributed to ruining my sister's wedding. For a brief moment, I contemplated transferring the remaining funds to my friend, asking her to proceed with the wedding plans as they were originally intended. However, my mind was flooded with the memory of my mother's last voicemail in which she had disowned me. I wondered what the point was in making such efforts for them if in the end, I was rejected. Although my actions may have been questionable, they were a reaction to the unfair treatment I had received from my family. I decided to switch off my phone and take my children out for the day, hoping to distract myself from these troubling thoughts. The following day, my friend called me again, this time filled with anger towards my sister. She expressed her frustration, mentioning that the wedding had tarnished her husband's reputation in their community. On the wedding day, my mother and sister had pleaded with my friend's husband to provide a minimum level of service and promised to pay an additional $10,000. He managed to arrange decent food and decorations, but since the initial $20,000 was mostly allocated to the venue, they couldn't afford much more. Unfortunately, the guests and the groom's family were highly critical of the wedding arrangements. In the midst of the chaos, my sister shifted all the blame onto the wedding planner, claiming that he had completely messed up the organization. My friend revealed that her husband was furious and wanted to expose the truth about the situation. However, my mother had begged him not to ruin my sister's life, and being a good man, he chose to remain silent and take all the blame himself, allowing the wedding to proceed. Despite this, they still had not paid the additional $10,000 they had promised. I felt an overwhelming sense of embarrassment as I listened to my friend's account of the events. I remained silent, absorbing the uncomfortable reality of my family's actions. My friend reassured me that she wasn't blaming me for anything, she was simply venting her frustration. Yet, I couldn't help but feel ashamed that my family had to undergo such public embarrassment. Furthermore, I was disturbed by the fact that they had unfairly targeted the wedding planner in their blame game. After hearing everything, my husband chimed in, stating that my family deserved what had happened to them. He believed I should not be too concerned about their situation since they had brought this upon themselves by trying to impress others through deceitful means. I began to contemplate that my mother's disownment might have been a blessing in disguise, allowing me to escape their lies and deceptive tactics. Moving on to the next situation, I encountered a shocking revelation about my husband. He finally confessed, in a state of inebriation, that he was in love with my sister. This confession surfaced amidst a night of drinking following dinner with my sister and her husband. We all enjoyed a good amount of wine, and after my sister and her husband left, my husband and I shared an intimate moment together. We continued to drink while listening to music, creating a comforting atmosphere. Throughout the evening, I noticed my husband seemed particularly happy and in a great mood, which was typical for him when he drank. During our conversation about my sister and her husband, he abruptly declared his love for her. His exact words took me by surprise. He said he was so desperately in love with her and expressed a desire to taste her lips. In that moment, he appeared to be lost in his thoughts, with a dreamy smile on his face. I questioned how intoxicated he truly was, to which he admitted he was quite drunk as well. Although I was also under the influence, his words hit me hard, and I found myself frozen in shock. I sat in silence, grappling with the unexpected confession while he remained blissfully unaware of the turmoil brewing inside me. The next morning, as I awoke, memories of the previous night flooded back. Without the haze of alcohol, the reality of his words crashed down on me, leaving me horrified and heartbroken. I noticed that he was acting as if nothing had happened, maintaining a sense of normalcy, although the hangover lingered. The silence only deepened my dread, as I felt an overwhelming sense of betrayal weighing heavily on my heart. I find myself in a complicated situation after a recent event. It seems my partner has woken up with a hangover, and I'm uncertain about how to approach what happened last night. He has always maintained a good relationship with my sister, built on mutual respect, which makes this situation even more confusing. Part of me wonders if I should simply overlook his drunken comments. After all, alcohol often alters a person's behavior and judgment. Maybe I should wait for him to bring it up when he's feeling better, but I'm not even sure he remembers the specifics of what he said, particularly regarding the intimate moment we shared. That experience felt different from usual. Despite my feelings of love, it was more than just physical. There was a sense of passion, tenderness, and love in his actions. He repeatedly expressed his affection by saying, "I love you, you are brilliant." It was heartwarming yet troubling, especially considering my sister. She has always been more modest and a bit of a tomboy, but recently, she has transformed, having lost 25 kilograms and dedicated herself to working out for an entire year. Last night, she wore a form-fitting red dress and complemented it with red lipstick, making her look absolutely stunning. We all showered her with compliments, which brought her joy. I mention this because I think it could somehow be tied to the situation. Once he's sober and able to think clearly again, it might be relevant to bring up the context of my sister's transformation and how it might have affected him. I find myself torn between believing the old saying that drunk minds speak sober thoughts and recognizing that alcohol can also cloud someone's judgment. While it's possible that his drunken state led to some kind of misguided confession, I struggle to accept that alcohol alone would make a husband express feelings for his wife's sister. It's hard to move past this, regardless of how much he may later deny those feelings. If I were in his shoes, I would find it extremely uncomfortable to interact with my husband and sister together after such a revelation, which is not sustainable for our marriage. To be straight with myself, I believe he might have been expressing a mixture of emotions, where lust and love can sometimes become entangled, especially under the influence of alcohol. It's crucial for me to have an honest and serious discussion with him. Only he can clarify what he truly feels, and even then, it may be difficult for me to continue our relationship after this. I know from personal experience that even if this is dismissed as mere lust, it could linger in my mind like a shadow, affecting how I view our connection. If we both want to move forward and try to make things work, seeking couples counseling and individual therapy could be beneficial for our emotional health. Reflecting on my past, I recall an incident where my ex told me he loved my twin sister instead of me, and when I confronted him about it, he casually tried to play it off as a mistake. Yet deep down, I knew he had feelings for her. It was a painful realization, and it requires an open and honest conversation with my partner. If he truly desired my sister, dating me would have been a poor choice, as no sister would want to accept her sibling's ex. Despite my initial thoughts, my sister ended up dating him after we broke up. Our upbringing in a troubled home often pitted us against each other, which may have led to complications in our relationships. Right now, this situation is incredibly painful to navigate. I know I must speak with him about his feelings without delay. His behavior since the incident makes me wonder if he even recalls what he said. I agree with the notion that drunk words are sober thoughts. Have there been moments where his actions towards my sister raised any red flags for me? I need to ask him directly and ensure we are facing each other during this serious conversation. His reaction will provide valuable insights. While he has always been fond of my sister and gets along well with my entire family, his feelings for her seem to stand out. Our families are very close, and we often do things together, enhancing the bond we all share. My sister has always been my best friend, making this issue even more complicated and heart-wrenching. It was not unusual for him to say he loved her. If he had merely muttered those words in a drunken haze, it could easily be dismissed as nothing more than the result of too much alcohol. Perhaps he genuinely liked her as a person, and what he expressed was simply an innocent crush. Yet, this was far from a fleeting moment of drunken passion. He took the time to clarify his feelings, leaving no room for doubt about the depth of his emotions. His words were not just the jumbled thoughts of someone intoxicated, they were well articulated and conveyed a profound sentiment. They surfaced when his defenses were down, a common occurrence after a few drinks, yet his confession held a significance that was hard to ignore. When people drink, they often say foolish things, but it is rare for someone to openly declare love for another in such a deliberate manner without there being some underlying truth tied to those feelings. I decided it was necessary to address the issue directly with him to gauge his true feelings. A straightforward conversation should reveal everything I needed to know. In terms of updating the situation, I set a timeline of 3 days for clarity. That's why I didn't provide an update on Sunday after my conversation with my husband. The truth is, I felt torn about what to think. When I spoke to my husband, he mentioned that he could barely remember much from that night, particularly after my sister and her husband left and we continued drinking. I shared with him what he had said, but there was no look of shock or surprise on his face. He simply expressed that he didn't recall making any such declarations. When I probed further and asked if he had any feelings for my sister before we started drinking, he said he had always considered her to be kind and warm-hearted. He then commented on how he found her beautiful and suggested that perhaps his drunken self had mistaken her looks for something deeper. He remarked that it was natural for people to be curious about others, especially members of the opposite sex. He noted that he had always thought my sister was attractive, especially after her recent weight loss, which seemed to boost her confidence and happiness. When I asked him how he would feel if he had to choose between my sister and me, he was taken aback and insisted that I was his wife and the mother of his children, and that he loved me very much. I pressed him further by asking him to imagine a scenario where we were all strangers, that he wasn't married to me and my sister was single. He found this line of questioning ridiculous, expressing a strong dislike for hypothetical situations that could lead to unnecessary conflict or anxiety. After dinner, he reassured me again of his love and happiness, indicating that I should not dwell on what he had said in a drunken state when he wasn't fully aware of his surroundings. However, doubts lingered in my mind. I kept thinking about the comments I had read from others who suggested seeking therapy alone to help process my feelings. The thought of how his continued connection to my sister, no matter how limited, influenced his decision to stay with me was troubling. I couldn't shake the visions of him being intimate with her, using me as a substitute for the passion he felt for her. Those thoughts haunted me constantly, making it nearly impossible for me to reach a point of intimacy with him. I would constantly find myself comparing everything, trapped in my own thoughts, unable to fully engage or feel comfortable. Being very close to my sister, living just minutes apart, only amplified my worries. I couldn't shake the idea that he might have settled for me as the next best option while maintaining a bond with her. I found myself obsessing over every interaction he had with her and what he said about her, which was always in a positive light. This made me question whether he felt the same way about me. I began to wonder if my thoughts were accurate or if I was simply imagining these feelings. The reality was that there would always be remnants of this situation lodged in the back of my mind. I knew I had to listen to my instincts, even if it was difficult. He had confessed to having feelings for my sister for several years, yet he reiterated that he loves me and values our life together. We agreed to start counseling to work through these issues. Moving forward, I decided that when I spent time with my sister, he would not be present. He acknowledged his feelings for her, admitting they had come and gone over time, but he emphasized that he never intended to act on them. He mentioned that the thoughts and feelings he has experienced over the years have come and gone like waves in the ocean. At various times, these feelings have been strong and intense, but they have also faded away, only to return again later. Despite the ups and downs of these emotions, he has made a firm decision not to act on them. He has reflected on this in the past and has always concluded that taking any action would not be the right choice for him. His commitment to this decision remains strong, and he is certain that he will not change his mind about it in the future.